Clara Bennett adjusted the sleeves of her navy blue cardigan as she approached the grand, polished doors of the Lancaster, Boston's venerable dining institution. The evening air carried a sharp chill, typical for early November, brushing her cheeks as she inhaled deeply. At 52 years old, Clara wasn't easily rattled. Decades spent in the ruthless hospitality world had taught her resilience, but tonight, her heart beat a little faster. She didn't look like the average patron of the Lancaster. No glittering jewelry, no designer handbag, no obvious air of entitlement. Just quiet dignity, a practical purse, and shoes built for comfort over spectacle. "You belong here," she reminded herself under her breath. Just weeks ago, she had received an extraordinary phone call. Harold Livingston, the visionary founder of the Lancaster and Clara's old mentor, had passed away. In a twist Clara hadn't seen coming, Harold had named her as the first and only candidate to inherit his legacy. She had always admired Harold, for his uncompromising standards, yes, but even more for his belief that a restaurant should be a sanctuary for anyone who appreciated true hospitality, not just the elite. The transition was being handled quietly. The staff knew only that new ownership was coming. Names, faces, intentions, all were left deliberately vague. Clara's visit tonight was by design. She needed to see with her own eyes the current state of the restaurant before stepping into power. She placed her hand firmly on the door handle and stepped into a world of muted luxury. A jazz trio played softly in the corner. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto immaculate white tablecloths. The scent of butter, rosemary, and slow-roasted meats filled the air. At a small podium stood a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit, his salt and pepper hair neatly styled, his features sharp. He looked Clara over with a fleeting glance that barely masked his initial assessment: not wealthy. "Good evening, madam," he said coolly. "Do you have a reservation?" "Yes," Clara replied with poise. "Reservation for Bennett, party of one." The maitre d', whose small name tag read Gregory Stanton, offered a tightly controlled smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course," he said, tapping at his iPad screen. There was a barely perceptible pause. Clara caught the flicker of hesitation. Solo diners, especially those not dripping in status symbols, were not their usual clientele. "Follow me, please," Gregory said, his voice polite but devoid of warmth. He led her toward the back of the dining room, near the kitchen doors, adjacent to the server's station. Clara took mental note: not the worst seat, but deliberately away from the prized window tables or center of the room. "Your server will be with you shortly," Gregory added as he placed the leather-bound menu on her table. With that, he spun on his heel, already greeting another couple whose diamond-studded watches and bespoke attire immediately drew out a far more genuine smile from him. Clara let her gaze drift around the room. The Lancaster was still beautiful, the bones of it remained unchanged, but something about the atmosphere felt mechanical. Staged. Servers moved with precision, their movements practiced and polished, but there was a lack of authentic warmth. Interactions were performed, not lived. Guests were evaluated by their appearance, their clothing, their demeanor, a subtle hierarchy Clara recognized immediately. Her server, a nervous young man named Luke, approached tentatively. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Luke, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Would you like to start with something from the bar?" Clara smiled warmly, sensing his nerves. "A glass of your house Pinot Noir, please." Luke's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Coming right up." As she sipped her wine and perused the menu, Clara noticed Gregory moving from table to table. With the wealthy, he was effusive, charming, animated. With those less obviously affluent, his demeanor cooled, still professional, but perfunctory, like ticking boxes on a checklist. She watched him shake hands with a real estate mogul at the corner table, laugh at a senator's joke near the window, and barely nod at an elderly couple celebrating what looked to be their 50th anniversary. Her meal arrived, a beautiful presentation of seared duck breast with autumn squash puree, and Clara savored every bite while observing the orchestration around her. The kitchen still performed at a high level, but the spirit of the place, the humanity, had faded. When Luke returned to check on her meal, Clara gently inquired, "How long have you been with the Lancaster, Luke?" The young man hesitated before answering. "Just over 3 years, ma'am." "Must be a great place to work," she said carefully. Luke offered a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It has its moments." Clara didn't press further. She already had her first confirmation: beneath the surface polish, something was very wrong at the Lancaster. And Gregory Stanton was at the center of it. The meal continued with mechanical perfection, courses arriving in precise intervals, plates resembling miniature sculptures, wine glasses refilled with quiet efficiency. But as Clara observed more closely, she began noticing cracks in the polished veneer. At a table near hers, an older woman, well-dressed but understated, requested to speak with the sommelier about a particular vintage she adored. The server, clearly uncomfortable, apologized that the sommelier was currently tied up with more pressing guests. Clara watched as the woman's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Gregory passed by moments later, offering the woman only a perfunctory nod, while lavishing attention on a group of executives loudly discussing their latest acquisition deal. Clara sipped her wine slowly. She knew this dynamic too well. When prestige becomes more important than service, a restaurant's soul begins to rot. Her own experience soon mirrored that of the overlooked woman. When she asked about the origins of a particularly delightful Chardonnay in her pairing, Luke stiffened awkwardly. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he murmured. "Our sommelier is assisting other guests at the moment." Clara smiled graciously. "No problem. Just curious." Luke's relief was palpable. She decided to probe a little deeper. "This place must have changed a lot over the years," she said, casually. Luke hesitated, glancing around before leaning slightly closer. "It used to feel different," he said in a low voice. "More personal. Mr. Livingston, the old owner, he used to greet the kitchen staff by name, would stop by even the smallest tables. Now, it's about appearances." Clara nodded, encouraging him silently. Luke's expression grew guarded again as Gregory crossed the dining room, his sharp eyes sweeping over the tables like a hawk surveying his territory. "Enjoy your meal, ma'am," Luke said quickly, retreating. Later, as Clara finished her dessert, a beautifully deconstructed lemon tart, a commotion erupted near the entrance. A small entourage of Boston's high society had arrived without reservation. Clara recognized a prominent city councilman among them. Gregory sprang into action, snapping at servers to rearrange tables, pulling a busboy by the elbow, barking instructions under his breath. The scene was efficient but chaotic, sending a ripple of tension through the room. Luke, clearly stressed, was pulled from tending to Clara's table to assist. Clara didn't mind, she preferred observing uninterrupted. What struck her most was Gregory's fawning. His smiles widened, his voice grew unctuous, his body language radiated servitude, but only toward the powerful. Regular guests, even those finishing expensive meals, were effectively ignored. As she watched, Gregory approached a young waitress, speaking sharply. Clara could just catch the hiss of his voice. "Keep the nobodies out of the prime seating zones, understand?" The girl flinched and nodded hurriedly. Clara's stomach tightened. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a toxic culture embedded deep into the management style. Harold would have been horrified. After requesting her check, Clara lingered for a few minutes, pretending to fuss with her coat, but really watching how staff moved behind the scenes. She spotted the kitchen staff through a half-open door, exhausted but dutiful, their faces marked by the same strain she'd seen too many times in badly run establishments. Luke returned with her bill and an apologetic smile. "I hope everything was satisfactory tonight, ma'am." "It was enlightening," Clara replied with a soft smile. She signed the bill, leaving a generous tip for Luke and a note scribbled discreetly on the back of the receipt. If you ever need someone to listen about working here, I'm interested. Confidentially. Below it, she left a prepaid number. Luke glanced at the note as he collected the check, eyes widening slightly. He said nothing but gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Clara stepped out into the cold Boston night, pulling her scarf tighter. Across the street, the glow of a small, nondescript cafe beckoned. She ordered a coffee and took a corner seat, watching the entrances to the Lancaster like a silent sentinel. At 11:15 p.m., the kitchen staff began trickling out. She recognized Luke first, his jacket slung over one shoulder. Then the young hostess, the one Gregory had snapped at earlier, and two more line cooks. Clara took a chance. She approached them gently as they walked toward the subway station. "Excuse me," she called, smiling warmly. "Mind if I buy you all a coffee? I have a few questions about the Lancaster." There was a beat of uncertainty. Then Luke, recognizing her from dinner, nodded slowly. "Sure," he said. "Why not?" They returned to the cafe, pulling chairs into a loose circle. Over steaming mugs of coffee, Clara let the conversation flow naturally. She asked about their time at the Lancaster, how long they'd been there, what had changed. Little by little, stories tumbled out. Harold had visited the kitchen daily, tasting sauces, chatting about life. Gregory rarely set foot inside now unless it was to reprimand someone. Expensive ingredients were quietly substituted with cheaper alternatives, but prices stayed the same. Staff were discouraged from reporting problems. Those who did found their schedules slashed or were pushed to quit. Promotions were based on appearances and connections, not merit. "It's not the same place it used to be," Luke said quietly, sadness in his voice. "Not since Mr. Livingston got sick, and definitely not since Gregory took over." The young hostess, her name was Sarah, added. "Gregory's only loyal to people he thinks are important. Everyone else is expendable." Clara nodded thoughtfully, sipping her coffee. She knew what needed to be done, but she needed more. Hard evidence. Witnesses. Proof. "Thank you," she said softly. "You might have just helped save the Lancaster." As they parted ways, Clara felt a growing sense of determination settle deep in her bones. This wasn't just about preserving Harold's legacy anymore. It was about restoring dignity to the people who had kept the Lancaster alive, long after its soul had been neglected. Tomorrow, she decided, she would dig even deeper. And soon, very soon, Gregory Stanton's reign of elitism would come to a crashing, public end. The next morning, Clara sat at the kitchen table of her modest Beacon Hill apartment, a cup of black coffee growing cold beside her laptop. Before her lay a growing web of notes, staff testimonies, financial oddities, shifts in supplier contracts. The picture forming was clear, and ugly. The Lancaster wasn't just suffering from elitist management. It was bleeding integrity from every corner. Clara placed a call to an old friend, Jonah Patel, a former restaurant auditor turned private investigator. "I need quiet help," she said simply. Jonah, intrigued, agreed without hesitation. "Get me names, receipts, anything," Clara instructed. Discreetly. "I'm still undercover." That afternoon, armed with nothing but her calm smile and the invisible shield of her soon-to-be ownership, Clara returned to the Lancaster, this time under the pretense of scheduling a private dining event. Gregory was only too happy to entertain what he thought was the curiosity of a potential big spender. He personally gave her a tour, his voice syrupy with insincere charm as he pointed out the dining rooms, the wine cellar, the private lounges reserved for preferred clientele. Clara played her part perfectly, wide-eyed, polite, just probing enough to make Gregory eager to show off. And he did, boasting about the rare wines they kept off books, the high-profile clients they catered to differently, the cash transactions that were better for everyone. Better for who? Clara asked, smiling sweetly. For us, of course, Gregory said with a wink. Keeps things flexible. He had no idea he was confessing to the future owner. Later that evening, Clara met Jonah at a quiet corner table in a small seafood bar near the harbor. He slid a thumb drive across the table. "You'll want to see this," he said grimly. Vendor invoices forged. Wine sales unrecorded. A shadow ledger Gregory kept separate from the official books. "This guy's sloppy," Jonah commented. "And arrogant." Clara nodded. "He thought no one was watching," she said softly. "Until now." The next day, Clara quietly arranged meetings with key staff members, those who had expressed frustration or sadness about the Lancasters' decline. Luke. Sarah the hostess. Marco, a line cook with 10 years under his belt. Even Thomas, the senior sommelier, who had long suspected the missing inventory but had been too fearful to speak up. Clara met them in cafes, parks, quiet corners. She asked careful questions. She listened. She took notes. From these conversations, a full picture emerged. Gregory bullied the kitchen into using inferior ingredients while maintaining premium prices. He pocketed cash sales of rare wines, sometimes splitting small cuts with complicit junior staff. Staff who questioned these practices were marginalized or pressured to resign. Thomas, the sommelier, finally confided. "I have records. I didn't know who to trust, until now." He handed her a flash drive filled with inventory logs, order discrepancies, and photos of off-book sales. Clara's phone buzzed late that night. It was Jonah again. "Heads up," he said. "Gregory's been bragging about a big promotion coming his way. Apparently, he's angling for a regional director role with the restaurant group that still technically manages the Lancaster, for another week." Clara smiled thinly. Not anymore. It was time. She had what she needed. The next morning, Clara made 2 calls. The first was to Martin Wexler, the attorney who had handled the sale of the Lancaster to her. "I need an emergency meeting called, staff and board, before Gregory finds out." The second was to Detective Renee Callahan, a contact from a past food safety compliance project. "I have documented financial misconduct by a restaurant general manager. Can you have someone available if needed?" Detective Callahan agreed without hesitation. By noon, the wheels were turning. At precisely 8 a.m. the following day, Clara arrived at the Lancaster not in her modest cardigan, but in a sharply tailored charcoal gray suit. Gone was the customer persona. She walked with measured purpose, a leather folder tucked neatly under one arm. The private dining room buzzed with confused staff and nervous board members. Gregory stood near the head of the table, arms crossed, irritation etched on his face. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded as Clara entered. Martin Wexler stepped forward smoothly. "Allow me to introduce the new owner of the Lancaster, Miss Clara Bennett." A hush fell across the room. Several gasps. A clatter of a dropped pen. Gregory's mouth fell open, then snapped shut. "That's impossible," he stammered. "It's very possible," Clara said coolly, stepping forward. "And effective immediately, you are no longer the general manager of the Lancaster." Gregory paled. "On what grounds?" Martin opened the folder, pulling out crisp, damning sheets of evidence. Shadow ledgers. Forged invoices. Staff testimonies. Witness statements. "On grounds of financial misconduct, fraud, and workplace abuse," Clara said, her voice steady. She paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle. "Security is waiting to escort you out," she added gently. "And Detective Callahan's team is ready to speak with you regarding the criminal charges." Gregory's bluster collapsed into stunned silence. When security approached, he made one last, desperate attempt. "You set me up," he hissed, eyes wild. "Coming in here dressed like. Clara smiled coolly. dressed like someone you decided wasn't worth your respect? Someone you thought you could ignore? You revealed yourself, Gregory. I simply observed. As Gregory was led out, the staff, the heart of the Lancaster, began to stir. Heads lifted. Whispers of relief echoed. Clara turned to face them fully. "This restaurant belongs to all of us again," she said clearly. "No more favoritism. No more hidden books. No more treating customers, or staff, like second-class citizens." She caught Luke's eye across the room. He smiled, a real, genuine smile this time. Sarah wiped away a tear. "We have work ahead," Clara continued. "But it's work worth doing. Together, we will rebuild the Lancaster into the place Harold dreamed it could always be." The room burst into spontaneous applause. Outside, the autumn wind whipped golden leaves across the cobbled street. Clara stood for a moment on the stone steps of the Lancaster, gazing up at the historic facade now bathed in early morning light. Justice hadn't come easily. But it had come. And with it, a new beginning. Not just for the Lancaster, but for every soul who believed that dignity, fairness, and excellence still mattered. In the days following Gregory Stanton's removal, the Lancaster buzzed with a strange, electric energy, part disbelief, part cautious hope. Staff moved a little quicker, smiles came a little easier, and the long-silenced undercurrent of pride began to stir once more. Clara spent her first week not in an office, but side by side with the team. She joined Chef Marco in the kitchen to inspect ingredients personally, ensuring no more substitutions would dilute Harold's vision. She walked the dining room floor during service, listening, observing, encouraging. She met with vendors and renegotiated contracts, prioritizing quality over kickbacks. And she listened, really listened, to every staff member, from the dishwashers to the senior sommelier. At every opportunity, Clara reminded them. "We are rebuilding not just a restaurant, but a legacy." One chilly Saturday afternoon, Clara gathered the entire staff for an informal town hall in the largest private dining room. No suits. No podiums. No barriers. "I won't pretend everything will change overnight," she began, standing simply among them. "But I can promise you this, you will be respected here. Your ideas will matter. Your work will be honored." She paused, looking into the faces of people who had been unseen for too long. "This place will not cater only to those who flaunt wealth. It will welcome anyone who values true excellence, in food, in service, and in spirit." There was a beat of silence. Then applause. Not the hesitant claps of obligation, but the thunderous, rising kind that fills a room with something almost sacred, belief. Luke came forward shyly after the meeting, shifting on his feet. "Ms. Bennett. Thank you. Most of us, we stayed because we believed it could be better. Even when it hurt." Clara smiled warmly, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. "It's already better, Luke. Because of people like you." In the weeks that followed, small miracles began to unfold. Regular customers who had stopped coming returned, drawn by word of mouth about something different happening at the Lancaster. The elderly couple once seated near the kitchen now found themselves proudly hosted at the center table. A young family celebrating a birthday was treated with the same reverence once reserved only for senators and executives. And slowly, the Lancaster's heartbeat grew stronger. Critics noticed too. A prominent food columnist wrote, "The Lancaster, once perceived as a playground for the elite, has rediscovered its soul under the quiet, firm leadership of Clara Bennett." One evening, as autumn surrendered to the first hints of winter, Clara stood alone at the bar, watching the restaurant hum with vibrant life. The chandeliers sparkled not with sterile ostentation, but with warmth. Laughter rang through the dining room, not forced, but real. Servers moved not as choreographed automatons, but as ambassadors of welcome. Chef Marco sent out a complimentary amuse-bouche to a young couple at a corner table celebrating an engagement. Sarah guided a party of retirees with the same enthusiasm she'd once reserved only for politicians. Luke poured a glass of house red for an artist sketching quietly by the window. The Lancaster had become a sanctuary again, for everyone. As Clara sipped a modest glass of Cabernet, her gaze drifted to the entrance. For a fleeting moment, she imagined Harold standing there, hands tucked into the pockets of his tweed coat, a knowing smile under his white mustache. "You did good, kid," she could almost hear him say. She raised her glass slightly in silent salute. Not to wealth. Not to power. But to integrity. To dignity. To the unwavering belief that greatness was not defined by price tags or prestige, but by heart. Later that night, as the last patrons drifted out and the jazz trio packed up their instruments, Clara lingered, savoring the quiet. The restaurant no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like home. And tomorrow? Tomorrow would bring more challenges, sure. But also more chances, to serve, to grow, to honor a legacy the right way. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the echoes of laughter, clinking glasses, and the warm scent of rosemary and butter wash over her. She had not just claimed a restaurant. She had restored a dream. And she knew, deep in her bones, that Harold Livingston would have been proud. The core values I learned. Integrity is the most valuable asset a person can possess. Never judge others by appearances, simplicity does not reflect true worth. The power of quiet observation and decisive, silent action can change even the most corrupted systems. True leadership isn't about power or prestige, it's about inspiring those around you and restoring trust where it has been lost. The big lesson for all of us. In a world that often judges people by appearances and status, remember that true value lies in how we treat others, regardless of wealth, fame, or position. Those who embody kindness, integrity, and silent determination are the ones who truly change the world.